What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're gonna jump in and talk about Shadowkeep. Specifically, let's talk about some of the biggest issues in the game right now. There are of course a lot of moving parts in a content drop like this, and if you ask me, there's a lot of stuff that Bungie are doing really well. In most cases, the things that aren't working simply kind of haven't reached their potential or need some tuning moving forward, so we will touch on community feedback, but of course, there's always opinion in a video like this. So guys, of course it's not on me to tell you to enjoy or not enjoy the game as it is. I think that Destiny remains to be in a really exciting place personally, and when I talk about the problems we've got in Shadowkeep right now, my perspective is that I'm really talking about opportunities that Bungie have to improve the game. So that's kind of the angle I'm coming from here, but definitely let us know what you think below, because we do need to push any constructive feedback that we have about the game right now as we move towards future seasons and stuff like that. So let's get into it! As we work through this video, we'll totally recognize some of what makes the current content drop pretty engaging, because to deny that would be sort of ludicrous. And the first thing I wanted to touch on would be the new artifact in the game. Of course, this is generally a pretty fantastic innovation. Bungie have given us new sandbox possibilities, and really they've fortified a lot of old builds and things that we've been doing in the game for a while. We spoke the other day about some rather potent builds, like the new Titan One Punch, which I think did drop a few draws, and for players who love that sandbox, this is amazing fun, and it's going to change over time. I think for a lot of people, the grind to unlock the artifact columns in the first place is okay. It takes some investment, but it's not overly crazy for what you get in return. However, I've seen a lot of people talk about the reset costs for the artifact, and I would agree that it's probably a little expensive as the costs increase for every reset. The idea with the artifact is to provide that variation in the sandbox. However, once you've done 2 or 3 resets, in my opinion, the cost to actually reset again is far too high, especially when you consider the amount of materials we need for other upgrades on 2.0 gear. You know, I think by the time we're at the 3rd reset of the artifact, we should probably be able to fully unlock it to play around with and make builds on different characters accessible all of the time. Considering that the artifact is a time-limited element in the game, I don't think it would be a problem personally to maybe do a 3rd or 4th final upgrade and then have full access to all of those mods in whatever configurations we want. Otherwise, I think the artifact on the whole has been really successful, and I'm really excited to see what mods and bonuses we'll get next season. Let me know what you think about that, but next, I really want to talk about strikes. One of the huge things I wanted to see would be new strike-specific drops, and currently, we don't have any, or at least we don't have a theme drop like Mindbender's Ambition or Imago Loop. Of course, that was a Destiny 1 weapon, but pretty much all of the Nightfalls in the game even have an emblem, and currently we don't have that in Shadowkeep, so maybe that'll change. Perhaps Bungie have something hidden away to drop later on, and if so, then I'll totally redact this minor complaint. But we did have strike specifics in D1, we lost them when Destiny 2 launched, and then Bungie reintroduced them based on community feedback, so I kind of figured with a renewed focus on the importance of strikes, we would definitely see some. Even if they took the Scarlet-themed Sparrow we see in Eververse, it would have been something extra to chase inside of those Nightfalls. Otherwise though, Bungie did add the Ordeal. It's farmable, it drops a lot of exotics and important currencies we need for upgrades, and that's a great system, which I think most players could probably agree in the game on the whole is more valuable than a single strike drop would have been. So that's pretty important to recognize, but themed drops, if you ask me, are also very important. So let us know what you think about the new Nightfalls, the strikes in general, Ordeals, and how that kind of interacts with the endgame. Now though, let's talk about elemental affinities on gear, and this is a pain point for Armor 2.0. In fact, it's probably the single biggest pain point of that new system. So of course, certain mods will have an affinity, which means that you can't just slot them into any armor piece. And the purpose of Armor 2.0 is to add deeper customization and progression, right? It is certainly doing both of those things on different levels, but many of the best mods in the game are things that we have to earn and grind for. We're also grinding the artifact to get the new perks from there, and then we're actually looking for god roll stats on these armor pieces before we go ahead and spend huge amounts of currency and resources to upgrade and masterwork them. So for a lot of players, I think this is already enough work and grind for a single piece of armor. And when you throw that affinity system in on top, it feels very restrictive, but for no real reason other than to add grind and randomness to the process. I think it also confuses players, you know? You end up with so much gear, so much stuff to read through if you care about that gear, and we're also continuously power leveling right now and getting drops which make other things redundant. So I think when you pair affinity with that, it can get pretty tiring for players who know what's up. But then for new players, I mean, that's an awful lot of stuff to take in, and it would be a huge shame if a lot of players end up kind of ignoring half of the systems in the game because it doesn't really make any sense. I'm not suggesting that we dumb things down at all, of course we've been all over that throughout Destiny's lifecycle, but I do feel like Elemental Affinity is convoluting the entire system with almost meaningless complexity and extra grind. Bungie will be updating some things next season, adding more accessible generic mods, and that's definitely cool, but they have suggested that Affinity isn't really going anywhere, and I just don't really understand it. It's kind of boring, to be honest. But there is more conversation about Armor 2.0 restrictions, including that it's mostly pretty hard to create god roll perk sets, which we've already had access to before with randomly rolled gear. That is a trade-off because before we couldn't simply pick our perks, right? And we do also get much higher stat rolls on new gear, which suits the current system, although I feel like that was created primarily to make the new armor more appealing. And so being real, it kind of costs us a hell of a lot of Guardian Green to upgrade armor to similar capacities as in Year 2, right? Be sure to let me know how you guys feel about the armor energy system and masterworking gear in Shadowkeep. For me, I think it's really expensive, but if I know I've got the right pieces, I'll totally work towards getting that stuff upgraded. It just kind of feels like it further highlights why Elemental Affinity doesn't really feel good as an RNG layer on top of everything else that we're working towards. So again, share your thoughts about that below. What about the actual new content in Shadowkeep? Well, I think here we need to recognize quite a bit of what works, and personally, I have been mostly impressed with what we've got. A lot of folks bring up the story or campaign element here, and Shadowkeep only had a very short initial campaign. It wasn't anywhere near as long as Forsaken or Vanilla D2. However, I think the quality of what we've seen, the characters, Eris's backstory, the pyramids, and then the Golden Age stories and the moon destination, they're pretty fantastic and vibrant, which is precisely what we need in the game. For most engaged players, I think it's pretty fun to get that meaty story and world stuff while we actually break into important gameplay. We're not simply getting past the story so that we can do other cool stuff. In Shadowkeep, we're kind of going straight into the endgame with an ongoing story, and I personally respond to that really well because we get to discover, speculate, and actually take in what's happening in the world as we play, as opposed to just kind of getting past it so that we can get to the meaningful gameplay. On that front, I think Bungie have come a really long way with this kind of content. In terms of activities, we do have lots of farmable reward sources. They've continued the kind of rune table, Chalice of Opulence, Forge concept of targeted rewards. And I was pretty surprised, to be honest, to see all of that lunar gear unlock so quickly, but I think the weapons especially are pretty cool, unique, strong themed weapons, and there are some gems to go farming for. Maybe that is less of the case for the Vex offensive weapons. I know a lot of folks don't particularly enjoy the reskins here, but in terms of the sandbox element, you do have things like Optative with Kill Clip and Outlaw or something, so there are definitely gems, be them generally less appealing. However, so far, Nightmare Hunts, specifically in the endgame, so the legend difficulty ones, for example, are a little bit confusing in terms of reward. Primarily, we're looking at high-end Nightmare Hunt mods, right? Those are the kind of main things that we get from these, and the weird thing is that they only really benefit Nightmare Hunts, and we're not getting drops which are useful elsewhere in the game. Once you're really into that endgame, it feels like the reward incentive is killing the motivation for a lot of folks to actually run these. Personally, I kind of expected Nightmare Hunts to actually award us a bunch of the gear for Shadowkeep, and as we've seen new ones, we have had an extra essence thrown in here and there. But it isn't like we're needing to conquer Nightmare Hunts to unlock the rune table, for example, or to get valuable endgame currencies or mods, and I think that's a shame. We are going to see the master difficulty hunts shortly, so perhaps they will have more meaningful rewards, but regardless, I feel like considering how scarce Pinnacle gear is, that would have been one big opportunity for the difficult hunts. We could have also seen actual lunar weapon and armor drops, maybe fully masterworked ones. That could have given us more opportunities at the roles that we were looking for, and there are the new upgrade currencies which aren't present in these modes, or even other kinds of enhanced mods that could drop. There are so many rewards in the game right now that could totally be dropping from Nightmare Hunts as well. Then we have Vex Offensive, which is another activity that a lot of folks would probably say is fairly short-lived. It's definitely pretty fun the first few times that you run it, and there are some farmable rewards there, which drop a hell of a lot, so it gives opportunities to get that god roll hand cannon we mentioned before. And honestly, as part of the content drop we've just had, I don't actually mind something that we can run maybe 5 or 10 times and then not really be too bothered about it, unless you're going for the title or something. The only time I really worry about Vex Offensive is the idea that something like this could be the core activity for next season, where we don't get a Shadowkeep alongside it, right? My simple hope would be that future iterations of the seasonal activity will be a little bit more involved and varied, much like Menagerie was, and honestly, I think that Bungie probably know this right now, so hopefully they've got that figured out for Season 9. Otherwise though, most of the other experiences of content in Shadowkeep have been pretty fun, and I can't wait for things like the dungeon to drop. While we discussed a lack of new strike-specific drops, we will be getting some dungeon weapons, so that's something that we haven't seen in the past, and it is kind of an evolution of the dungeon and its meaningful rewards, so most of us can agree that Bungie are making a good move on that front. It's perhaps some of the other staple rewards we've become used to in Destiny 2 that are missing at the moment. Now let's speak about Pinnacle Power drops. How do you guys feel about these? I've seen quite a lot of mixed opinion about power level, and really, Of course, Bungie have removed the cap for power. There is no real endpoint. And for me, there's kind of a completionist element that makes me dislike this almost. But I think that's just some minor neuroses of mine. And the real complaint, I think, comes with Pinnacle Power Grind and how horribly RNG that becomes with the new system. So of course, Pinnacle drops come with +1 power, and that means that you need to fill every slot on your character with the same power before you'll level up. So your first Pinnacle drop will start with 951, but then you need to fill every slot with a 951 piece of gear to get up to that threshold before you'll get a 952 drop. And because of RNG, you can get horribly unlucky here, essentially being forced to grind until you find the drop at the right power level to fill that one slot. You might be missing boots, for example, and so now, before you make any progress with power gains, you're going to have to fill that slot. So technically you could need maybe hundreds of powerful drops to actually get to 960, because there is no real protection on those drops. Now, having an RNG progress lock on your power, at least at this level, is probably not a great thing for the game, and specifically, back in D1, some of you guys may remember Forever 29 and us needing that one specific drop, and it seemed like Bungie didn't find this especially healthy, so they ditched it. One thing we should add about Shadowkeep right now is that we likely don't have all of the Pinnacle sources actually available. You know, things like the dungeon and Vex Offensive Final Assault do have the potential to drop those, so we'll probably get a couple more ways to actually earn Pinnacles, and that's a good thing. However, I feel that there should be some kind of protection, as in the game should know which slots you need, and try and do a better job of awarding those slots within a reasonable period of time. If we saw a fix like this, I think it would be fair enough based on what we have live in the game right now. So let me know what you guys think about the Pinnacle gear system in general. But for a maybe slightly less popular opinion from me, I kind of feel like Pinnacle Power has almost been created because of, but also seriously damaged by the fact that power is almost kind of cheap in Destiny 2 in a lot of ways right now. Even Pinnacle Power has a window of value in the game, and Bungie are offering lots of power boosts, right? We got 750 for everyone at the launch of Shadowkeep. They now have a 900 power booster that you can purchase, and I kind of wonder whether the Pinnacle Power system was almost created in an attempt for power to still mean something despite all of these new systems. Based on what we've seen, it's entirely possible that Bungie could create a 950 booster for the start of next season. And of course, if it's only to 950, then Bungie are in that position to say, hey, we didn't give away Pinnacle Power. That's not something that we do. And of course, this is just conjecture, but the bottom line for me is that it's feeling more and more difficult to specifically target power leveling in the game. I don't know if you guys share that opinion whatsoever, but I figured it's probably best to explain my personal bias against the power leveling system in the game in general, just for the sake of honesty, so definitely let me know what you think. However, I would say that outside of everything we've discussed in this video, which seems like a lot now we've spoken about it, pretty much everything else that Bungie have done inside of Shadowkeep has been a pretty solid innovation, and I've tried to highlight as many of those things as possible throughout this video. Of course, we're making feedback about what isn't working so well, so it may feel that we're weighting things on the negative side a little bit, but again, I think these are big opportunities for Bungie to improve these systems as we move across seasons. The other topic that some folks might want me to throw in would be Eververse, and of course, Bungie have been shifting towards an Eververse that offers more and more actual paid content over earnable rewards in the game. I think having items there that you can either purchase or not purchase is one thing, but as we've spoken about recently, I think Bungie definitely should do a better job of explaining to players which Eververse content is going to be purchase only and which Eververse content could sell for Bright Dust, for example, because we did in the first 3 weeks see a hell of a lot of new stuff go up for silver, and then a couple of weeks later actually appear for Bright Dust, and that feels pretty frustrating for players. And while I'd love to say, hey Bungie, you need to put more stuff that we can earn in-game, I feel like we've been around that thing so many times, and of course Bungie are probably reliant on being able to make a fair amount of revenue off of Eververse, so if that's necessary to keep the rest of the game healthy, then as long as it's done the right way, I'm personally not going to complain too much because, honestly, I'm not the biggest sucker for emotes and ornaments and things like that. Although, as many of you guys know if you've listened to my feedback in the past, I have always preferred stuff to drop in the game via gameplay rewards, even when it's cosmetic. Bungie kind of justify Eververse in the way that it works with this theme of, you know, gameplay rewards is one thing and cosmetic rewards is another. And that's very much their philosophy, which is fine, but there's also something to be said for looking badass because of the things you've done in Destiny, and that's what Trials ornaments were back in D1. That's what the Shattered Throne solo emblem is, or the Niobe Labs ghost shell, you know? Half the time I throw that thing on because, for me as a player, it kind of says, hey, this person did a cool thing, even if that ghost shell is kind of crappy, who cares, man? It's all about a balance, right, ultimately in Destiny, so the number one thing that I don't want Bungie to do is upset the gameplay balance and the value of things that people do in the game with Eververse, but without me ranting for a million years, it's probably better that I ask for your opinion when it comes to Eververse stuff, so be sure to drop it in the comment section. For now though guys, that sums up my feedback for Shadowkeep, the current content drop, which consists of Shadowkeep Season of Undying, and the content that we've got currently rolling out on the calendar. Once again though, I am thoroughly enjoying Shadowkeep, so hopefully no one blows this out of proportion and calls me a hater or anything like that. The ball remains in Bungie's court, and they have all the opportunities in the world to create fantastic content just the way they have been. So let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, a rating is very much appreciated down below, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to get subscribed if you enjoy the conversation and you want to keep up to date with the world of Destiny 2. Thank you for listening to me rant, and whatever you do, I hope you have an awesome day.